What do you want us to be saying here on TV One 20 years from now about Justice or Else?
Well, first off, I want us to be able to, it's just like the young man mentioned, talk about the impact. I think whatever it is accomplished at the Justice or Else march will only be enhanced by us talking about what people do afterwards. And that was what was so amazing about
So not the event itself, what happens on the Monday after the event.
Exactly. What people do, what they go back to, what they donate to, the black businesses that make the t-shirts, that I think is the impact we want to be talking about 20 years from now.
So one of the things that I'm thinking about is how do we define justice? How do we move the bar and the needle forward? How do we ensure that black lives are not just matter but are protected and that folks are surviving? That is part of the conversation that we must have, again, agreed after the march, but also needs to be discussed tomorrow.
I mean, one thing I would add to the conversation, I think that one of the things that's missing from mainstream media and just the conversation in general when we're talking about, you know, things like Justice or Else or even other major marches is the necessity of black institution building and autonomy. Because I think that one of the problems that I have as a young person now, well, as a younger person now, is that I don't have a Farrakhan, and I think that Black Lives Matter, there's people like DeRay McKesson and others who are trying to fill that void, but I think we have to use that as an opportunity to figure out how do we actually use that narrative to drive people towards institution building, because that's, to me, that's the sustainable part of the work, is how do we nation build, how do we institution build. But I think that's what's missing. And I think Justice or Else gives us an opportunity to do that, and that's what I want to hear 20 years from now.
Well, I think what's interesting, if we're talking about today, what happened in '95 when people say what didn't get done, is that a lot of the people who were critics, some who showed up, were unwilling to be a part of the agenda the day after.
Yeah.
And so the real issue now, I think, with Justice or Else is, all right, for all y'all who gonna show up, and all y'all who are saying stuff, then are you gonna stick around after the cameras leave, after the gathering, to, yes, drive that agenda moving forward?
Because we literally can't afford for them to do, or for us to do anything else. Like, that has to be the narrative. Like, we are in a very critical space. We had the Urban League's State of Black America come out last year that says Black America's in a crisis. That's 20 years after this initial march. That's 50 plus years after the March on Washington. We cannot afford to dwell in crisis. We can't afford to go from crisis to crisis. We have to figure out how to unite and work together towards a common goal, even if the means toward that end are different.
I truly see this being a call not for just those who came 20 years ago, but this is a call for the millennial generation, or as we call it, the Joshua generation. This is the call for those young brothers and sisters, because those young brothers and sisters weren't present and 20 years ago, but now...
Keep in mind, see, I was 26 Million Man March.
Right.
So that event, and I was working for a black radio station.
Right.
So that event and covering it also played a role in terms of what I did the next 20 years.
Right.
And so you're absolutely right. The clarion call is important, because what you do afterwards will now determine what goes next. Go ahead.
Because if you look at how the circumstances in this country have shaped up, there's no other call. Then historically, there has been no other call for justice since A. Philip Randolph's in 1942. The call has always been about jobs and equality, but there hasn't been no demonstration that's solely focused on justice. And so to have this particular march at this point is critical. And then if we incorporate the principles of Dr. King talking about the redistribution of pain through economic withdrawal, I mean, that's massive in 2015. When you're talking about black people who have $1 trillion buying power, then you're talking about a millennial generation who they say by 2017 will have a $200 billion buying power. So when you're looking at that, that hits America right in the it hits America hard.
One thing I also think is really key here, the criticisms that we used to aim towards Louis Farrakhan and what he managed to accomplish, and what I think that means today as far as how we look at Black Lives Matter and the conversations that occasionally come up about leadership. You can have controversial leaders who still do great things. We have to learn how to appreciate the process of building institutions, as you've talked about. What they managed to build back then was amazing. It was something that was unprecedented, and you had tons of people who thought that it couldn't be done, and you've had amazing things be accomplished since. And I hope we have that same level of humility with this march, and recognizing that the new generation generation of people, they're going to stumble too, but just like 20 years ago, it looks great in retrospect, that's what's going to happen this time.
If we're talking about justice or else, and you're talking about those institutions and also being specific, here's one. I didn't go to one of the schools, but this is very clear. I'm sorry, you can't walk around saying you going back to your HBCU for homecoming, but then you don't send a check.
Yeah.
Because you can't be in a situation where you're seeing schools shut down. You're in a situation where all of a sudden, if there's a corporate campaign, 60 to 80% of the money being raised coming from corporate America versus from the members. So part of that is, and again, if I'm looking at freed slaves who took meager pennies and nickels to create schools, and we're supposed to be that $1.1 trillion, at some point, you got to be honest. So part of this deal is, if you're talking about sustaining institutions, you can't have, you're not going to, your black leadership, frankly, let's just be honest, will not be coming from majority institutions, largely where you have white leaders.
Right.
The HBCUs play that critical role, and so folks have to recognize that's part. You can't allow those institutions to die. I'm in media. I don't care what anybody says. You can sit here and talk about how you love somebody on CNN or MSNBC and Fox and everything else, but if you don't have black media, Farrakhan couldn't have gotten the word out in 95. If you didn't have black media, March in Washington for Jobs and Freedom would have died. And so we're sitting here all happy, like, man, can you get a show on CNN? No. Why don't you watch TV One? Or our black newspapers and black magazines and black websites? That's also part of the institution building that positions us. Jason and Faraji.
I'll try and be more simple. For what Roland just said, for everybody who's watching, everybody's paying attention, if you can't go, send a check. Okay, I mean, because the reality is there is a black institution, a black media outlet, a black school waiting for a check. If you cannot go to these things, send your money, send your time, send your volunteering, and that's how we end up building institutions. And I think sometimes what ends up happening is people claim they don't know. People claim they don't know what institutions to give to, even though they're all out there and they're all readily available. And that's something that can change, because we don't have to have our feet on the ground to have our dollars go into the right pockets and make change.
I think one of the big things is, along with institution building, let's keep this march in perspective and in context. This is a march about justice. So it's a very, very high principle on a spiritual level. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, what he exhibited 20 years ago, people say, well, what came out of it? The purpose was the spiritual restoration of black men. At the end of the day, it was about resurrecting black men mentally, spiritually, about who they are and the connection we have to Almighty God. So when we talk about this context, yes, we need to have policy. Yes, we need to have institutions. Yes, there should be other systems in place. But at the root of it, you're talking about changing and transforming the condition of human beings. So if we get the context about justice, what the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad says, the principle of fair dealing and the law that distinguishes between right and wrong. If we keep that, then all of those other pieces are going to fall in place.
Final comment.
If we act, and that is my main thing, we have to have an agenda behind those ideals in order to see those
absolutely.
And I think it's for the smart. It's for we pool our resources. We got over 40 million black people in this country, and you telling me that we can't fight a war on two fronts of dealing with black on black and dealing with the justice issue, threatening the sustainability of our community? I don't think that's the case.
Adam, 20 seconds, final comment.
The best way for black people in this country to transform our material conditions is to own and control what we do. That's institution building.
Jason, final comment, 20 seconds.
Everything we do from this point on is going to be talked about in 20 years. Let's make sure that when we go to this march, it matters. If you can't go to this march, make an impact in some way financially.
And then continue to look at News One.
Exactly.
Absolutely. But I ain't trying to be here in 20 years. So I'm trying to position this for the next brother coming on, because I plan on being back home in Texas or in Jamaica chilling on the beach. All right then, folks. I appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Be sure to watch News One now on Monday, where we'll have a complete coverage of the 20th anniversary of the Justice or Else rally.